jolly curly hair made up a lot of difference between our heights. I couldn't remember her name, so I smiled and nodded as she prattled about teachers and classes. I didn't try to keep up. We sat at the end of a full-length table with several of her friends, who she introduced to me. I forgot all their names as soon as she spoke them. They seemed impressed by her bravery in speaking to me. The boy from English, Eric, waved at me from across the room. It was there, sitting in the lunchroom, trying to make conversations with 7 curious strangers, that I first saw them. They were sitting in the corner of a cafeteria, as far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking, and they weren't eating, though they each had a tray of untouched food in front of them. They weren't gawking at me unlike most of the other students, so it was safe to stare at them without fear of meeting an excessively interested pair of eyes. But it was none of these things that caught and held my attention. They didn't look anything alike. Of the 3 boys, one was big, muscled like a serious weightlifter, with dark curly hair. Another was taller, leaner, but still muscular, and honey blonde. The last was lanky, less bulky, with untidy bronze-colored hair. He was more boyish than the others, who looked like they can be in college, or even teachers here rather than students. The girls were opposites. The tall one was statuesque. She had a beautiful figure, the kind you saw on the cover of a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, the kind that make every girl around her take a hit on her self-esteem just by being in the same room. Her hair was golden, gently waving to the middle of her back. The short girl was pixie-like, thin in the extreme with small features. Her hair was a deep black, cropped short and pointing in every direction. And yet, they were all exactly alike. Every one of them was chalky pale, the palest of all the students living in a sunless town, paler than me, the albino. They all had very dark eyes despite their range in hair tones. They also had dark shadows under those eyes, purplish, booze-like shadows, as if they were all suffering from a sleepless night or almost done recovering from a broken nose, though their noses, all their features were perfect, angular. But all this is why I could not look away. I stared because their faces so different, so similar, were all devastatingly, inhumanly beautiful. They were faces you never expected to see, except perhaps on the airbrushed pages of a magazine, or painted by an old master as the face of an angel. It was hard to decide who was the most beautiful. Maybe the perfect blonde girl, or the bronze-haired boy. They were all looking away from each other, away from the students, away from anything in particular as far as I can tell. As I watched, the small girl rose with her tray, an open soda, unbitten apple, and walked away with a quick, graceful lope that belonged on a runway. I watched, amazed at her live dancer step, till she dumped her tray and glided through the back door, faster than I would have thought possible. My eyes darted back to the others who sat unchanging. "Who are they?" I asked the girl from my Spanish class, whose name I had forgotten. As she looked up to see who I meant, though already knowing probably from my tone, suddenly he looked at her, the thinner one, the boyish one. He looked at my neighbor for just a fraction of a second, and then his dark eyes flickered to mine. He looked away quickly, more quickly than I could, though in a flush of embarrassment I blushed my eyes at once. In that brief flash of a glance, his face held nothing of interest. It was as if she'd called his name, and he looked up in involuntary response, already having decided not to answer. My neighbor giggled in embarrassment, looking at the table as I did. "That's Edward and Emmett Cullen, and Rosalie and Jasper Hale, and the one who left was Alice Cullen. They all live together with Dr. Cullen and his wife," she said this under her breath. I glanced sideways at the beautiful boy, who was looking at his tray now, picking his mango to pieces with long, pale fingers. His mouth was moving very quickly, his perfect lips barely opening. The other 3 still looked away, and yet I felt he was speaking quietly to them. Strange, unpopular names, I thought. The kinds of names grandparents had. But maybe that was in vogue here. Small town names? I finally remembered that my neighbor was called Jessica, a perfectly common name. There were two girls named Jessica in my history class back home. They're very nice looking. I struggled with a conspicuous understatement. Yes, Jessica agreed with another giggle. They're all together, though. Emitting Rosalie and Jasper and Alice, I mean. And they live together. Her voice held all the shocking combination of a small town, I thought critically. But if I was being honest, I had to admit that even in Phoenix, it would cause gossip. Which ones are the Cullens? I asked. They don't look related. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s or early 30s. They're all adopted. The Hales are brothers and sisters, twins, the Blondes, and they're foster children. They look a little old to be foster children. They are now. Jasper and Rosalie are both 18, but they've been with Mrs. Cullen since they were 8. She's their aunt or something like that. That's really kind of nice for them to take care of all them kids like that when they're so young and everything. I guess so, Jessica admitted reluctantly, and I got the impression that she didn't like the doctor and his wife for some reason. With the glances she was throwing at their adopted children, I would presume the reason was jealousy. I think that Mrs. Cullen couldn't have any kids, though, she added, as if that lessened their kindness. Throughout all this conversation, my eyes flickered again and again to the table where the strange family sat. They continued to look at the walls and not eat. Have they always lived in Forked? I asked. Surely I would have noticed them on one of my summers here. No, she said in a voice that implied it should be obvious, even to a new rival like me. They just moved down 2 years ago from somewhere in Alaska. I felt a surge of pity and relief. Pity because as beautiful as they were outsiders, clearly not accepted. Relief that I was the only newcomer here, and certainly not the most interesting by any standard. As I examined them, the youngest, one of the Cullens, looked up and met my gaze, this time with evident curiosity in his expression. As I looked swiftly away, it seemed to me that his glance held some kind of unmet expectation. Which one is the boy with the reddish-brown hair? I asked. I peeked at him from the corner of my eye, and he was still staring at me, but not gawking like the other students had today. He had a slightly frustrated expression. I looked down again. That's Edward. He's gorgeous, of course, but don't waste your time. He doesn't date. Apparently none of the girls here are good enough looking for him. She sniffed, a case of sour grapes. I wondered when he turned her down. I bit my lip to hide my smile, and I glanced at him again. His face was turned away, but I thought his cheek appeared lifted as if he were smiling too. After a few more minutes, the four of them left the table together. They all were noticeably graceful, even the big brownie one. It was unsettling to watch. The one named Edward didn't look at me again. I sat at the table with Jessica and her friends longer than I would have if I had been sitting alone. I was anxious not to be late for class on my first day. One of my new acquaintances, who considerably reminded me that her name was Angela, had biology 2 with me the next hour. We walked to class together.